I'm going to call this special meeting of the Waco ISD Board of Trustees to order. We have a short agenda tonight, in particular canvassing the votes from the November 3rd Board of Trustees election. This meeting, as all of those since March, is held pursuant to the governor's rules regarding open meeting requirements to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And in accordance with those rules, we certify that members of the public may attend the meeting, attend the meeting in person or watch it live on Channel 17 or on our website. Members of the public attending in person can sign up to offer public comment on an agenda item as our normal practice. And those who were interested in submitting a public comment online were given notice that those comments needed to be submitted to Mr. Wucher by 10 o'clock last night. Members who aren't physically present in the boardroom are participating via a video conferencing application which allows for two-way communication between those in person and those participating remotely. And all of the items are voted upon tonight have been posted in accordance with state law.
Have to be there, like, actually.
If you have any questions about these suspended open meeting requirements, please contact the Office of Attorney General by calling 888-672-6787 or by emailing toma@oag.texas.gov. Next on this agenda is public comments for the item on our agenda. No public comments were received and no one is here in person. Okay. So that brings us to consider, discuss, and take appropriate action regarding canvassing the votes from the November 3rd, 2020 Board of Trustees election. We had 3 members of the board on the ballot November the 3rd, and the results were made available to the board in the packet. I'll entertain a motion from anyone to accept the administration's recommendation as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the order approving the canvass for the November 3rd, 2020 joint general election as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Vidania. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes. Is there any discussion?
Just a quick item to say congratulations. Races are always hard to run, and it's very evident that your districts, the respective districts, were very supportive of you. I think that's indicative of the contributions you're making to the district. So I just want to say and repeat congratulations to you, and we look forward to working with you.
Well, I just want to say it was an unprecedented election. I don't think in the history of the school district we've had anywhere close to 20,000 people or more vote. And so you guys have the distinction, probably, let's hope, for the near future of getting the most votes ever cast in an election for Waco ISD. And of course, I agree with Mr. Sykes. Your win does indicate the good work that you're doing in your communities. You have support across the district and in your single-member district, Mr. Vidania. And I'm look forward to continuing to work with both of you. Okay, that is it for the special meeting tonight. Oh, I guess we need to vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. At this point, we will adjourn. We will reconvene at 6 p.m. for our regular meeting agenda. Thank you. Good evening. I'll call this regular meeting of the Waco ISD Board of Trustees to order. A quorum is present in person, and the meeting is also available as a video and audio conference in accordance with the governor's rules related to the mitigation of the spread of COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, we again certify that members of the public may attend in person or watch it live or on Channel 17 or Grande or Spectrum, and also on our website. Members of the public attending in person may sign up to offer public comments on an agenda item, as is our normal practice. Members not attending in person were instructed to submit any comments they had in writing to Joshua Wucher by 10 o'clock last night. Members of the board who are not physically present in the boardroom are participating via a video conferencing application, which allows for two-way communication between those in person and those participating remotely. And all items to be discussed and voted on tonight have been posted in accordance with state law. If you have any questions about the suspended open meeting requirements, please contact the Office of the Attorney General by calling 888-672-6787 or by emailing toma@oag.texas.gov. Before we go into closed session, I just want to say here at the top of the meeting that we have been following the news about a Lake Garrett Montessori teacher. We are heartbroken, and our hearts go out to Garrett Hunt's family. We want to acknowledge that this has been a very difficult week for our employees at Lake Garrett, our students, and our families. We learned that on Monday, Ms. Hunt, who was a fifth grade teacher on the campus, was charged with murder in the shooting death of her son, Garrett. There is a lot we don't know, but I don't know that we could learn anything about this terrible tragedy that would allow us to make sense of it. Our thoughts are with everyone at Lake Garrett this week. We know that we have a lot of work to do there, and we reach out to them and intend to support them throughout this. This is not going to be something that we recover from overnight. We want to thank our principal, Stephanie Tankersley, for her leadership on that campus in this unbelievably difficult time. And we also want to thank our student services and support team for helping our students and our employees process what's happened today and in the weeks to come. With that, we are going to adjourn into closed session. Pursuant to Open Meetings Act, Sections 551, 071, 72, and 74, we expect to reconvene in open session at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, the board has returned from closed session where no action was taken. And so we will continue with our agenda. Oh my gosh. Public comments. Do we have any public comments tonight? No? Any submitted electronically? No, no public comments. Okay. Next is the oath of office. Ms. McCutcheon, are you going to do the honors? Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, the Constitution of the State of Texas provides that before an elected officer may assume office, they are required to take the oath of office. As a notary public, I'm honored to have the privilege to administer the oath of office to you at this time. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the Office of Trustees of the Waco Independent School District of the State of Texas, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state. So help me God. All right, congratulations, guys.
Okay, next on our agenda tonight is consider, discuss, and take appropriate action regarding the reorganization of the board. Reorganization of the board happens after every election, and so it is a bit different to have reorganization on our agenda for November. It was a bit unusual to have our election in November. So here we are, post-election, with an item regarding the reorganization of the board and the election of officers.
Mr. President, I would like to move that we retain our current slate of officers on the board. That's you as president, Norman Manning as secretary, and Alan Sykes as vice president.
Thank you, Mr. Dupuy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Manning and Mr. Vidania. Second and a third. Any discussion?
I just want to say thank you guys for serving. It's a lot of extra hours, and I do appreciate it.
I'll say the same thing. Thank you guys so much for your leadership. It's been invaluable.
Okay, with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? None. Passes unanimously. I just want to thank all of you for the confidence in me, and I am very grateful for each of you. I'm grateful for our team. I'm grateful that we're all in this together still, all 7 of us. You know, we've been through a lot together, and I think we've got a lot more good things. We're entitled to some good things to come, right? But we have a lot of good things going on and a lot more to come, so I appreciate you guys. All right, next is special recognitions. Mr. Woodruff.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, Board. And speaking of good news to come, great segue for special rec. Each year, the Waco Tribune-Herald hosts its Heart of Texas Readers' Choice Awards, in which they invite local readers to cast their votes for their favorites in a variety of categories, from medical and automotive service providers to eating establishments, specific food categories. It's an opportunity to show readers to show their support of local individuals, businesses, and organizations. First place and honorable mention recipients in each of the 175 categories are announced in the publication's monthly magazine, Waco Today. For the November 2020 issue, for the 2020 awards, Waco ISD and one of its campuses each received an honorable mention. Public High School, Waco High School received an honorable mention, and Waco ISD, our district, received an honorable mention for the best place to work. Yes, very nice indeed. And there's a copy of the Waco Today. Waco ISD Parents as Teachers Blue Ribbon designation. So for the third consecutive year, our Waco ISD's Parents as Teachers program earned the National Blue Ribbon status. The quality endorsement and improvement process helps ensure that parents as teachers affiliates are achieving fidelity to the model and delivering high quality services. The Waco ISD PAT program first obtained Blue Ribbon status in 2018 and was able to maintain it by meeting all 100 quality standards and 20 essential requirements, again, during the 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020 school years. Now, these essential requirements include visit frequency, child screening, family goal setting, and child well visits and immunizations. The annual international conference, which transitioned to a virtual concept this year, was held October 5th through the 8th. There are currently 67 families enrolled in Waco ISD's PAT program. We want to give a special thank you to Gwen James, Director of Early Childhood, Anita Henderson, Lead Parent Educator, Regina Cotton, Parent Educator, along with Felisa Ramos, Desiree Salazar, and Yuri Tumlinson. Texas Association of School Business Officials recently announced the educational organizations recognized for following best practices in the area of purchasing operations. The Award of Merit for Purchasing Operations, which is sponsored by Board Cooperative Purchasing and recognizes the commitment to following professional standards in the acquisition of goods and services, will be presented at the organization's annual conference next year in February. Waco ISD was among 53 educational organizations to receive the 2021 TASBO Award of Merit for Purchasing Operations. TASBO's executive director, Tracy Ginsburg, actually noted that Waco ISD's application was so well prepared that parts of it will be used, quote, as a guide for districts to utilize when preparing their submission next year. A huge congratulations for the 13th consecutive year for Waco ISD to receive this distinction. Cheryl Davis, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and her team, Sherry Smith, Director of Business Services, Juanita Arachega in Purchasing, Jeremy Gillespie in the Warehouse, Judy Monroe, Tricia Parker, Derek Payne, Guido Quijano, Donald Robertson, Rhonda Taylor, Tracy Trussell-Moore, and Donald Williams. And we have some of our folks over here off to the side, not on camera, but Ms. Davis and Ms. Smith, thank you so much. And last but not least, Waco ISD's theme for the 2020-2021 school year is Empower All, Value All. That theme reflects the district's mission to provide an educational foundation that empowers and values all. It celebrates learning and growing as students, professionals, and individuals. Waco ISD recognizes that when individuals feel empowered and valued, their ability to overcome challenges, grow, and succeed is strengthened. However, the district also recognizes that no one individual or organization can thrive and accomplish these goals or missions alone. Instead, we are at our best when families, employees, and the community join together to realize there's a shared hope and dream to empower and value all students, staff, and support their future. In November, the district is recognizing the Waco Fire Department for the Waco ISD Award for Outstanding Community Partners. The Waco Fire Department has a long history of partnering with Waco ISD and its campuses in a variety of capacities. Most years, firefighters are present at multiple campuses with their trucks and lights flashing to greet and high-five students as they arrive for the first day of school, often passing out supplies at the same time. Neighborhood fire stations open their doors to elementary students to tour the facility, learn about the operations, meet firefighters, and learn about the trucks and engines up close and in person. Each fall, firefighters visit campuses to provide educational training regarding fire safety. With health and safety precautions, of course, in place this year, the Waco Fire Department partnered with Waco ISD Communications Department to create videos for fire safety awareness and a virtual fire station tour with plans in place for future virtual meetings between campuses and their neighborhood fire stations and firefighters. During the 2018 to 2019 school year, the department partnered with the district to hold a logo design contest for station number 5. One of our University High students' designs was selected and can now be seen on the station's shirts and truck. The department has provided a celebrity chef team at the Waco ISD Education Foundation's annual fundraiser in years past, and Lieutenant Keith Guillory was honored as the Outstanding Volunteer for Secondary Campuses during the 2018-2019 Adopt a School Partnership Awards for his efforts to support Waco High School. And additionally, stations have provided donations of supplies and volunteers for various events across the district, participated in campus career days, and even provided assistance for Waco High's homecoming tradition, the burning of the W. Pictured here is Waco Fire Chief Gregory Summers, along with Captain Veselka and firefighters Davis and Wise, from Station 95, accepting the award virtually. We thank the Waco Fire Department, Station 5, for all of their continued efforts to support our district. And that'll do it for this evening's recognitions.
Thank you. Dr. Kincannon, Superintendent's Report.
I have just a couple of items that I want to tell you about, and then I'm going to have our Chief of Staff, Kyle DeBeer, do the COVID update for you this evening. But first, I wanted to mention our P-TECH planning grant. Donna McKethan and Dr. Robin Wilson submitted that grant this week to the Texas Education Agency. And if selected, Waco ISD would partner with McLennan Community College to develop a program of study to prepare students to become certified teachers. Students participating in the program would take courses at MCC, leading to an associate's degree in teaching, and would transition to MCC's University Center to complete a bachelor's degree in education from Texas Tech or Tarleton State University. I'm excited about this, whether or not we get the grant. This is something that we want to do in partnership with MCC. We want to grow our own, and there's a path to do it through the CTE program and this P-TECH planning grant. This is a $150,000 planning grant, but it opens the door for us to begin this program. And I do want to thank Dr. McCowan at MCC and her staff who've been so supportive of this project. We started talking about this at our design thinking seminar last year about this time. So we'll keep you posted on whether or not we get selected. The other thing that I have for you is the proposed calendar dates for 2021. You can take those and look at them and let me know if you see any problems with those dates. I know you all like to have those in advance, so those have been provided for you this evening. And then I'm going to ask Mr. DeBeer to come up and give us a COVID-19 update. And happy Thanksgiving to all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Kincannon. We have had 188 cases of COVID-19 reported on our campuses or in other district facilities since the first day of classes on September 8th. That includes 43 cases that have been reported in the last 7 days. And just for comparison, if you go back to the start of the school year, it took us 24 days from the first day of classes to get the first set of 43 cases. So what you see in those numbers and what you see in the chart that's on the screen is that the pace in which cases are being reported has generally been picking up. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this chart is you see it pick up through about week 5 and then drop off and pick up again. If you recall, the first time that we closed our high schools as well as our CTE academies for in-person learning and shifted to fully remote instruction was right in the middle of week 5. And so we expect to see a little bit of a change from the pause that we've taken this week in in-person learning at our high schools. We did want to talk with you a little bit more tonight about the process for contact tracing as well as the COVID-19 rapid testing that's underway in our district, thanks to support and supplies from the state. As you're aware, when we engage in the contact tracing process, the first thing that we look at when someone says that they've tested positive is whether or not they were on campus during the time in which they might have been infectious. And so generally for someone, that's going to be from 2 days before they first showed symptoms, or if they're asymptomatic, 2 days before their positive test result, through about 10 days after when the symptoms started. If the symptoms have resolved by then, it can be longer if the symptoms continue outside of that period. And our process is to look at anyone who they were in close contact with, that's within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more over the course cumulatively of an entire day, and ask those people to quarantine for 14 days, which is from their last contact with the person who tested positive. That's the incubation period for the virus. That's consistent with the state health guidance that the Texas Education Agency has published, which says as part of our screening process for staff who are on campuses, we need to determine if they've been in close contact with someone who's tested positive. And if they have, quote, that they must remain off campus until the 14-day incubation period has passed. Now, one of the conversations that's happening, not just around the state of Texas, but really across the country, is how to reconcile the different guidance that school districts have been given about how to treat, in particular, educators who are in close contact with someone who's tested positive. In August, the Department of Homeland Security issued an update of their essential critical infrastructure workforce guidance and identified a number of educators in that guidance as essentially essential employees, with the idea that in many cases, those educators would continue to work following close contact with someone who tested positive, as long as they themselves didn't begin to develop symptoms. And so you've seen school districts in different places applying this guidance so they aren't quarantining as many of their employees. As I mentioned earlier, this seems to be on its face at odds with the guidance that we've received from the state. We've had conversations with the health district about their comfort level trying to reconcile these pieces. But the bottom line is we continue to follow that more conservative path, which we think is appropriate for our community, but also consistent with the state's guidance of anyone who's in close contact being quarantined for 14 days from their last contact with someone who tested positive. This certainly has led to some operational challenges. You see that reflected in the decisions we've had to make in some cases to close campuses for in-person instruction and transition to fully remote instruction because the number of teachers that were quarantined and the number of other employees that were quarantined made it difficult to adequately and safely supervise students at those campuses. I do want to note that we have two groups of employees that we do in fact treat as those essential critical infrastructure workforce people, and those are our nurses and our police officers. So we have about 50 people around the district that actually are treated as essential employees. In the event that they're in a close contact with someone who's tested positive, they continue to come to work as long as they don't develop symptoms. But what we're able to do right now is we're able to provide additional access, more frequent testing for those employees if they fall into a situation where they're identified as a close contact. And that's one of the advantages that we have of the COVID-19 rapid testing. In our first monthly allotment of testing supplies that we received from the state this month, we received 10,880 tests and a bunch of additional personal protective equipment to support the testing process. All of our nurses have gone through the process to be trained in administering the test. We have some additional staff members in the district who have gone through that process as well, and we've been able to begin rolling out testing. So far, over about the last week, we've conducted 437 tests and had 21 positive results and I believe 2 inconclusive results that we've referred folks to their doctors for further follow-up. We are focusing testing first on employees who are on campus and next on students who are on campus, and starting with those campuses that you've seen closed. So we've tested essentially all employees at GW Carver Middle School. We've offered testing for students and staff at Indian Spring Middle School, at Lake Air Montessori. Tomorrow we'll be offering testing at University High School and Waco High School for students and staff, really with the goal of taking these locations where we seem to see a growing number of cases and trying to stop that growth as quickly as we can and identify those folks who may be asymptomatic but still spreading the virus on campus to cut off that line of transmission. And that really does represent one of the larger challenges that we've seen lately, and that's folks with mild symptoms who tend to dismiss them and think this can't be COVID, especially this time of year when a lot of people have allergies. Some of the symptoms of COVID look like the symptoms of allergies, and so in some cases we've had people who have said, essentially, I think I get allergies, this feels kind of like that, it doesn't feel that different, it's not COVID. And after 4 or 5 days, when something doesn't change, they decide to get tested out of an abundance of caution, realize that they test positive. The problem being in that time period where they kind of dismiss the symptoms, they've exposed a lot of people, and we start to see a growing number of staff members quarantined in those cases. So our hope is that in particular, by making testing available for people who have mild symptoms that wouldn't otherwise keep them away from work, we can identify those cases sooner, reduce the number of close contacts involved in those cases, which will help us maintain the staffing of our campuses, maintain supervision of students without bringing students together in large groups, and make sure that folks who are positive are moving off campus as quickly as possible. So we're really excited about the direction that the testing program's heading, and we think this is another important tool that we can deploy to help keep our students and our staff safe and healthy. And that's really kind of a high-level overview of kind of where we are with testing and where we are in the trends that we're seeing in cases that you can see. I'd note just one last thing about the chart, and that's that this last week is the current week that we're in, so that's only partial data. So we're on track if the week finishes through Sunday, kind of like the rest of the week has been, to be about where we were last week.
Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. DeBeer,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Manning?
my question is, when one of our teachers get this and you put them out, or they have to go out for whatever the amount of time, do they have to use their personal time? I think I heard before that there is some guideline about they can use some other time or whatever. But what are we doing with teachers and staff that have to go out for the 10 to 14 days?
Absolutely. So for the most part, our folks are able to work remotely. If they're in a position, especially our teachers are able to work remotely, because we're set up to transition to remote learning, they're teaching unless their symptoms are so serious that they can't work. All of our employees have access to a special class of leave that Congress created in some of the legislation responding to the virus earlier this year that's available through December 31st that provides leave to cover that first initial stretch, and also provide some additional leave in the event that you, as an employee, have a childcare issue because your childcare facility has closed as a result of positive cases, or your child has been sent home from their school or childcare facility for positive cases. So for the vast majority of our employees, they're able to either work remotely, or in the event that they aren't, then that additional leave kicks in and it doesn't require them to go into the state or local leave days.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Thank you. Good update. Next is our consent agenda. We're going to pull item K for discussion. Is there any other item any member of the board would like to pull? Yes. Okay. So before we address K in particular, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, absent item K.
Madam President, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented, except with the removal of item K.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Houston. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, item K is a third-party agreement, third-party interlocal agreement with the county, city, and school district concerning library services.
Actually, that's item O.
Well, darn it, that's what I wanted to talk about.
I can still talk about it even though.
K, I don't have any questions. about K.
Yes, K was pulled, K we didn't quite get there on
K, we
the
don't have.
interlocal
Oh,
agreement.
okay.
But I can still speak to O.
Please do, thank you.
We apologize for the late addition of the interlocal agreement with the city of Waco on behalf of Waco McLennan County Library. This is something we're really excited about. We wanted to get it in the board packet. We were negotiating language late. But this allows us to have a partnership with the public library system so that our students can check out digital resources. We initiated a conversation with the public library system several weeks ago because we thought, hey, now that our kids have devices, we could have access to all the books and audio books and digital resources, library resources that they have. And so we reached out to the director, Essie Day, who was so delightful and excited to partner with us. And Jerry Allen has been working closely with her to get this up and running. And we want our students to be able to use those devices to check out books and other resources. So I'm very excited not only about the e-card system, but also about the opportunity to continue to partner with the library. They have, I believe, 17 librarians within their library system, and they have specifically children's librarians, and they have the ability to really help us, and we're excited to partner with them. So that's what this agreement does, is to establish our ability to have our kids get an e-library card through the school system so that they can check out books.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for my confusion, but that is exciting and a little bit of silver lining to all of our kids having devices, and then just a really great partnership with the city. Okay, next is review and discuss long-range planning process. Oh, hi, Jared. You were sitting behind that. I was looking for you on my screen. Welcome. All yours. Thanks.
Good evening, and thank you for letting us join you here tonight. So in addition to some of the representatives you've seen us here, Amy Jones and myself, Casey Nicholson is joining us, and Doug Dawson, who are both architects working here for the firm. And we're going to be working here on the Waco Long Range Plan. And this really represents, if you'll go to the next slide. The last month, you'll recall that we presented the final leg of the Waco ISD snapshot, and that was really focused on the facility assessment, the educational suitability and vision, and demographics and capacity. In essence, it really kind of gave us a sense for where we were at. And so we left the district with the considerations of thinking about how these things start to intersect. How do we move forward through a process and ultimately come up with a solution? And that really is focused in around creating that facility's long-range plan. So if we'll go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about that. And the facilities master plan is really a roadmap to guide the vision and efforts for the district for the next 10 to 15 years. So think of it as putting the stake out into the future. It's not necessarily the steps to get there, the individual steps, but it's where we want to end up at through that process. So it is casting that long-term vision. And I'll contrast that with a bond plan and the bond program. And that's really one of the incremental steps or a phase that helps you move in that process to get forward. There's some times where those two are one and the same, in terms of achievement, but the other times there may be 3, maybe 4 bond programs that really add up to be that facilities master plan to achieve that vision over the time. So in the facilities master plan, you really talk about the strategy and the vision long term. And then in the bond program, you really start getting into the individual projects in that phase from a facility standpoint, but you also are able to add in some additional projects that aren't necessarily discussed in the facilities plan. Transportation, land purchase, technology, those type of elements within the design. So tonight, as we look at the next slide, we wanted to talk a little bit about the process of what it's like to get there. And so what you'll see here on the screen is two options that we were looking at moving forward, and to give you a sense of the process. So here we've outlined, it says 21 and 21, that should actually be 21 and 22 in terms of the years at the top of the screen. but basically a calendar Gantt chart. And so in option A, really it focuses in around what if the district wants to call a bond in November of 21. So that becomes a marker for us to be able to hit. So in this one, you'll see there's a first step there in the solid red line that is the facilities master plan and bond planning process that would in essence run continuously from beginning to end. In this case, starting in the January timeframe and running through very specifically August 21st, because that would be the last day to call a bond at that point. So that would really be the focus of starting talking about through the facilities master plan, creating the vision, and almost in parallel talking about that first bond program. The next step you see there is the dashed line is the fact communications process. And that's really important because from August until November, the district transfers from kind of a visionary process and moving forward to just talking about the facts, about what the bond is able to get. It's not persuasive is the big thing in that one. You'd have the bond election, and then you'll see there in the kind of maroon line is the project implementation. And here we're saying that this is roughly a 2 to 5 year period when you're talking about new facilities in general. Of course, I'm sure there will be smaller projects that would take a shorter time frame, but put that out there. The idea on that, or the opportunity in that one, or the end result, and it's similar in option B, is that 2 to 5 year time frame would have potentially a large project, potentially opening as late as 2026. So as we stand here today in 2020, that's roughly 6 years out between seeing a large-scale project come in. Of course, an elementary school may take quicker time, move through. It all is to be determined as we look at those projects. So that's option A. Option B takes a sequential and separate process along the way. So here there's a distinct facilities master plan effort that may take somewhere between 6 and 8 months. So that's just focused on casting that vision. Here you're seeing that would take roughly from January to the June timeframe. So the idea of capturing parents and focus here in the spring effort. Over the summer, you'd go on pause at that point. And then when school reconvenes, individuals and stakeholders are back in the area, you would start into the bond planning process. It's kind of let's refresh on the master plan process. Let's then start talking about the bond and moving forward. And in this case, it's planned around a May of 22 bond, so about a year and a half from now. And so the magical date there is February 23rd, that we would then look at, again, transitioning to the fact communications plan, and then in turn, upon a successful election of the bond referendum, then you'd go into the project implementation as well. So it is a lengthy process. A lot would be discussed during those time frames. So if the board so decides to move forward, then we would implement those. And so then the question becomes, what topics are covered in these two processes? So as we look at the next slide, we've kind of identified out the two different scenarios here. The first is the facilities master plan. And this is where we have the opportunity to really engage community and stakeholder-based committee to really start working through these issues and start discussing much of what we presented here at the board already, from the facility assessment, capacity, but it's also diving in deeper from campus tours, talking about ideal educational delivery and what those facilities might look like, and ultimately getting to strategies that you want to implement at the high school, middle school, elementary school level. How do we support administration and other facilities as simple as transportation facility? And ultimately, the goal of this group would be to hone in on a single vision, that 10 to 15 year master plan, and provide a recommendation to the school board that this would be the recommended path forward. And ultimately, we would look for you to agree upon it as well. In that second segment, on the bond planning phase, again, this is that looking at the initial phase of the master plan. You could pull forward that same committee group, but you dive a little bit deeper into demographics, technology, transportation, and really hone in on the projects that would be potentially called within a bond. Similar to the facilities master plan, the committee would look to provide a recommendation to the school board. This is what we think the community would appreciate in terms of projects and cost and impact on the tax rate, all those fun things. And then ultimately the board would be responsible for making that call for a bond aligned with one of those dates, which generally carry forward, year to year within that time frame. So we have time frame, we have what's talked about, of course, then when and who would be involved in these meetings. And so on the next slide, we're outlining a process that we would have regular meetings every 2 to 3 weeks is what we'd propose to keep consistency moving forward. We'd roughly target about 90 to 120 minutes per meeting to really kind of keep that focus, targeting maybe Monday evenings starting in January. And overall, depending upon A or B scenario, we'd look at having 8 to 12 meetings to guide through the entire process between stakeholders, board meetings, those type of things. And for the first meetings, we would, of course, look at starting virtually at this point, depending upon what's happening in the world these days. That may switch to in-person attendance if possible. Otherwise, it may just mean touring facilities virtually or having open doors at certain times so we can get that interaction. Here, we'd look at roughly 30 to 45 participants from the community and stakeholder group. But of course, we're going to be supported from the Board of Trustees, yourselves, and the vision through the superintendent, all the way down to principals and teachers, and hopefully maybe even students in gaining their input. So that's what it is, when it is, how it is, and ultimately, if you decide to move forward, we would look for the board to start the nomination and recommendation process for who those committees are. So we'd want to make sure that we get a good broad range across the district, representing different campuses, different businesses, that it is a good canvassing of Waco ISD moving forward so that they can participate. And so finally, if you go to the last slide here, ultimately it's starting to bring this information together from the snapshot, moving into the long-range plan, and ultimately then casting the vision moving forward and projects happen in the short time frame of 5 to 6 years maybe. So with that, would welcome any questions that you might have. Otherwise, would also look for approval to move forward.
All right, anybody have any questions? So I really appreciate how you've gotten us to this point, and I think it's really going to be exciting for the community to have some conversation, well, to have a committee that is able to see the facilities and to really have some solid conversation about what we want the future to be and where we should focus our priorities and whether or not there's a will for a bond election, whether that's in November or May of '22. But I really think it's been a long time since the community's had an opportunity to have a conversation about our facilities and long-range plan. And so it's exciting. And I know you guys do an excellent job of guiding the committee through the process. Having seen some of your work in the past, just the education of the community about what we have here and how we make it better is really good. It's really good. So, curious, so are you guys going to be helping with the committee? Is that the plan? Doug and Karen?
Sure.
Casey?
Yeah. So we'll be your core team. That's why we're sort of reinforcing here as we're getting ready to go. So Doug, Jared, and I will all be your day-to-day contacts, and we are all together communicating. So we're already blocking out potential schedules. We're already getting ready to go over all of these next steps. And so that's why you're starting to see the three of us more frequently. There's going to be much more of us part of it, but you'll see the three of us more consistently.
Curious, have y'all engaged in this process in COVID time already? Have you had a success with the committee meeting virtually?
So we've had many meetings during the remote process, not only in terms of internally as a design firm, but also externally as well. So we've started engaging through Austin ISD is the one that comes to mind, where we've engaged 70 to 75 individuals within a meeting room. How do we address questions? How do we work through that process? And ultimately taking, whether it's the large group or a smaller group, really through the process and marching through. So that's part of what we're discussing about how do we take the community in this case, which has a very diverse set of goals and priorities, bring them together, start looking at rooms within Zoom to be able to break those out, questionnaires, how do we do virtual tours and make sure everybody's kind of seeing and feeling the same thing. So definitely well-versed and experienced in doing that and ready to take on this challenge.
Seems like there'd be some benefits in that you can present some quality video of facilities and give a lot of information that maybe you wouldn't see or get if you were personally going to tour. And it may make the process more accessible to people too. So I think there are some silver linings to that. So how many people do you recommend that each board member suggests to get a solid group of around 40?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I'm thinking 3 or 4 because I want to add representatives from elementary, middle, and high school. So we want staff to have a voice as well with our community representatives. So 3 to 4.
Okay, so at this point, y'all are thinking we could begin after Christmas break?
We're ready to start. So, in fact, we scheduled our first internal meeting for next week. If you guys are a go, we're going to begin getting organized. So those first meetings would be in January. We haven't calendared those yet, but if you all are agreeable, we'll begin doing that after tonight.
So when would you like board members to submit names to you?
You could get those to me before the Christmas break, before December 17th. That's Thursday, our board meeting, the 17th. So if you could get those to me by then, that would be really nice.
And explain again, when we ask or we nominate people, the expectation will be that they attend, how many meetings did you say? 10?
So I think we're looking at 8 to 10 meetings between now and June, and I think depending upon the will of the committee, will of the board, as that starts to develop, that may extend a few additional meetings if we're looking at the November bond, but then it may pause at that point and go to a fall committee as well, which may extend the meetings just to refresh everybody.
And what would be your, so if folks ask or say they're going to be out or unavailable, let's say for the month of March, but they want to serve, what is the goal here of folks that we ask to participate? 90% or what would be?
Well, I think industry-ly, I would guess most of the meetings would be the goal, at least ideally 75+%. We'd love to have them at all. But I do think that the technology that we're in, especially as we're talking about Zoom, we do have the opportunity to record, opportunity for people to participate. We'll start getting into discussions as well. We'll be posting agendas and meeting minutes and the presentation, so a lot of people can get caught up. So even if they have an emergency at that moment, they're able to carry along the story as well.
But the power is the conversation with the committee. So we do want people who can be engaged, and we also, my experience has been that we post the meetings as board meetings, and we have a quorum at least of the board there so that the board is hearing the conversation of the community, and you have time to process that along the way before decisions are made.
Well, and I think one thing I want to make clear for the community is no decisions have been made. About a bond, about when we'd call a bond, if we'd call a bond, and what would be included in a bond. So this is really our first step, and that is to engage our community in a conversation about what our priorities should be. And then if there is a will to call a bond and to give the board direction, both on those priorities, what the community would like to see is our long-range plan, and then recommendations about a bond. So I just want to caution folks to not get ahead of yourselves. There's still a lot of work to be done, and the board hadn't made a decision about any of it and can't until we get our committee together and start having those conversations. So does anybody have any questions about the process or about the committee?
Madam President.
Go ahead, Mr. Manning.
Oh yeah, can he go back to that slide that was showing what the direction of the committee and what the people, yeah. No, go back to the other one. Okay. So we're gonna be looking for people to have meetings every 2 to 3 weeks, 1.5 to 2 hours on a Monday evening.
That's correct.
Okay. And what I'm trying to determine also who should we be looking for. I'm quite sure that they all should be parents of WISD students, or should we, with this type of thing, you got parents who work. Should we be looking also at some of our senior citizen, retired educators of WISD?
Sure. Yeah, I think you want a good mix of people. So I envision parents, I envision staff, I envision representation from the city. So as we make decisions, we have their input as well. And, just community members representing all areas of Waco ISD.
Well, and that's a really good question. Thank you, Mr. Manning. And I'm looking to you, Dr. Kincannon, to make sure that the group is well balanced, representing all of our different constituencies, our parents, our staff, our community members, our city, and different, just all the different voices that we have in the community to make sure that everyone's given an opportunity. So while the board members individually may not know who each of us are nominating, we're going to look to you to make sure that if they're duplicates, let's say, or we end up submitting names that have a heavy concentration of parents and not enough of teachers, let's say, that you're going to help us balance that committee out.
Sure, I will do that, and if you'll just, since I'm new to the community, help me with your nominations for the committee and tell me who they're representing, whether they're a parent or they're from a particular part of the community, that would be helpful.
I got another question.
Yes, sir.
What will be the status of Transformation Waco in this? Will they be part of this, or will this just fall totally on this board?
Yeah, we expect to have representation from Transformation Waco on the committee, not necessarily their entire board, but we do want them represented because they are in the facilities using them, and this will impact them.
Mr. Sykes.
Jared, looking at the involvement that we've had from a design and planning standpoint on using the example of the Paul Tyson replacement project, with the scope of this project as it evolves, what do you envision would be the feedback that we would get, periodic type feedback in terms of not necessarily deliverables, but what we would hear as the project proceeds through this timeline?
Well, I think I would phrase it as, in Paul Tyson, using that as the example, we received feedback from the board about how we were proceeding moving forward, some of the options there. As we got into the design project and kind of getting into the nuts and bolts, we really had a core group that was providing us input about what worked well and didn't work well at the campus. And I think that's very traditional for a project, and for a very specific project. I think here we'll be grasping with larger scale issues, and so I think it'll be feedback about those issues that will be constant. So I imagine, the first few meetings, we kind of are looking at introductory meetings of overall kind of bringing them up to speed to the discussion to date. And then I think it's really from meeting 3 and on that we're starting to hit some real issues. We'll hit some hot buttons in there, for everybody. And it may be as simple as, boundaries, neighborhood schools, or maybe, other elements that we really need to improve to address the facility condition assessment. So I think those are the things that we'll hear, and we'll be tracking through all that and making sure that we're responding through, keeping logs of questions, parking lots, to be able to log those and carrying it forward. And I'd hope that, we would get feedback from the board as well, that they're all guiding towards that ultimate vision moving forward.
Would you envision that we'd be receiving monthly reports through board meetings like this, or what frequency, I guess?
I envision regular agenda items where the board is providing feedback on what they're hearing throughout the entire process.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming up to Waco. And I guess you'll be coming up here quite. Thank y'all for your work.
You'll be seeing a lot of us here soon.
Thank you. Safe travels.
Belle. Dropout. You were back there behind the pillar. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm going to go over two things this evening. The first is the annual dropout rate report, which I'll explain is a little bit different than our graduation rate. And then that'll take us into a discussion about Brazos as a program for the review. So first, let's talk about, if we can you click me off? There we go. Okay, so what is the annual dropout rate? This is not graduation rate. This is the yearly amount of students who leave us from grades 7 through 12 who do not appear, hard to breathe through a mask, and now I'm fogging up. All right. These are the kids who leave year to year. These are the ones who do not graduate. They will count against us in graduation rate, but in the bigger picture, there's 7th through 12th graders who do not show up in any other public school in the state of Texas. So every school has a dropout rate. We'll go to the next one. What's the difference between the dropout rate and the graduation rate? So this is a question I get a lot. The annual dropout rate is what it sounds like. It's the 7th to 12th graders who do not show up in anywhere else. They do not show up in any other public school system. TEA takes movers. So we do have kids who are movers. For example, if they unenroll with us and enroll with a district in the area, they're considered a mover, not a leaver. These are children who are not in any other educational setting that we can find or locate. And that's pretty important when I get into the numbers. We're going to talk about numbers of kids every year that have been dropping out. So the annual dropout rate has to be monitored year to year because there's an open and shut window to it. It's not ongoing like graduation rate. Graduation rate is what we're calling cohort. So it's a collection of students that in 4 years, they have to graduate 4 years and a summer. So the state of Texas flags them the first time they're in any high school, puts them in a group, and you would probably know this more informally like the class of 2021, the class of 2022. Graduation rate follows these cohort children for 4 years. So this is a lagging indicator in accountability because we get, after the 4 years and a summer, we get this time period where we can submit the kids, and if someone left us, they go somewhere else. It cleans up that graduation rate. So annual dropout rate is a yearly measure. It's real time, whereas graduation rate is a lagging indicator. Okay. Next one. So I'm going to give you some numbers so that it will help you see. And some are percents, and some are actual numbers of students. So I feel like it's powerful when we talk about number of students. So from 2014-15 to 2018-19, we have had a total of 1,185 children drop out of high school, and they are reclaimed nowhere else in the public school system or anywhere else. So when you look at these numbers, that 179, that 207, that 285, if a student drops out once, they are not in the measure again. They'll get us in graduation rate. So this is a new crop of dropouts every single year. And so I think when we talk about percents, if I tell you 3%, that might feel like a low number. That might feel like a good number. But these children, these numbers give it a face. And so in our top one, for the 247, only 7 of those children were middle schoolers. The other 240 were grades 9 through 12. So that seems to be where we're having the most difficulty keeping our students. Next. So I wanted to give you another look at this from the 9-12 perspective. Since the bulk of our students who are dropouts are 9 through 12, I pulled the campuses so you can get some perspective on the number of students. So you'll see it starts at the bottom with that 14-15 and goes to the top with 18-19. Brazos, of course, stands out, but Brazos is a credit recovery school, a dropout recovery school, so we would expect to have a lot of students dropping out from there because it's almost the last stop. And in the next presentation, I'll talk about what we're doing to beef up Brazos as a service for our students. But I want you to also notice that Waco High and University's numbers are steadily increasing. So the number of students dropping out from those two settings is increasing. And it's one thing for Brazos to be a thing we have to watch. It's another when the traditional high schools are getting more and more students dropping out. And for fun, I've looked at these kids' transcripts, and I can't tell you how many of them drop out in grades 11 and 12. It's almost very stark, and that's, to me, that's what is happening in those years that we really need to think about for improvement. Next slide. So this is in percents, the annual dropout, okay? And I put the 7th and 8th graders back in for you. This is Waco ISD versus the state each year. So giving ourselves some perspective on how many dropouts. So that orange is our 9 through 12. And you can see how much higher that is than the gray. When the state combines its 7 to 12, we are still percentage-wise well above just with our 9 to 12 students. Next. So this year's 247 dropouts from 18-19. They were out of the 6,522. We have an overall 3.8%. So what I did with that 247 is show you which schools they were dropping out of from. It would be preferable in this pie graph if almost all of it was green, because Brazos is students who are high at risk for dropping out. And we understand some of them are 20-year-olds. Life will pull them away from that finish line. But you can see that University and Waco High are contributing a great deal to the percentage of students, the number of students that are dropping out. Next slide. So breaking it down by ethnicity, okay? So out of our, for each of these bars, it's out of the total number of students who are that ethnicity. So out of our African-American students, 4.4% of our African-American students are dropping out. 3.5% of our Hispanic, 3.4% of our white, 6.3% multiracial. To give you some perspective, for the state, African American is 2.2. The state for Hispanic is 1.6. The state for white is 0.8. And the state for multiracial is 1.2. So again, I didn't show you percents first because it seems like, oh, 4% in these, that must be a good number. But when we think about the number of students it is, you can kind of hone in on the problem a little bit. Next. Let's look at this from a program point of view. And for this one, remember, a kid can be more than one thing on this graph. There can be a student who is at risk, takes CTE, is economically disadvantaged, and is homeless. So kind of keep that in mind when we do these percents. But remember, this is the percent of kids from that program. So of our at-risk students, and at-risk means at risk for dropping out. Of our at-risk students, 4.4% of them drop out. CTE, 2.1%. EcoDis, 3.3%. Our ELs, which we've been working a lot on, is 4.7%. Students in foster care is 3.3%, and that number is actually lower than the state's. It's the only one of them that's lower. Students who are homeless, this isn't necessarily unexpected, 14.8% of them dropping out, and then special education is 4.1%. Again, to give you perspective, as you're looking at those numbers, for the state, at risk is 1.8%. CTE is 1%. EcoDis is 1.8%. ELs are 2.5%. Foster care in the state is 4.5%. Homeless is 6.6%. And special ed is 1.8%. So you can see that our numbers are larger there. So what I'm going to be doing with the at-risk, and that's okay, you can leave there. What I'm going to be doing with the at-risk students is taking this one step further. So the state requires us to identify reasons, solid research-based reasons why a kid is at risk for dropping out. For example, they've been retained, they've failed a STAR assessment at some point. So every single year, we go through all the campuses and we label these students to know who they are. So what my next phase will be is studying which of those indicators out of the 14 is the biggest cause. Because if it is retention, we all kind of think it's going to be they've been retained when they were in elementary. What if that's not the case? What if it's that they're ELs? So we want to hone in on what's exactly the reason for these students, and then what's the trend so that we can build things that stop that dropout for that particular indicator.
Can you explain ELs for the
So,
board?
English learners. So ELs is ESL, bilingual, there's a lot of names for the programs that go with it, but EL is English learners. So what have we done? The first thing we did was we restructured University and Waco High into what's called a cohort system. And I'll go into that a little deeper when we talk about Brazos, but essentially it means there is a cohort counselor and a cohort assistant principal who work together as a team, and they get the class of whatever. And they follow the children for 4 years. And this is to avoid that break-in relationship. When we interviewed the Brazos kids, they felt like nobody knew them. They'd have a different counselor each year, a different AP each year, and their parents didn't feel connected. Like, who do I go to talk to if I want to talk about my kid? So there are 4 teams at the high school. They are the class of 2021, 22, 23, 24. And they meet pretty frequently. Together, the team meets frequently, but they meet every 3 weeks with the principal to identify their top 10 students for each of the type of categories that would make the kid drop out. If it's an attendance issue, we can get there. If it's a pregnancy issue, if it's a life issue, if the kid is suddenly not showing up to school, that's alarming. If the kid is dropping grades in just one class, it's meant to be completely preventative through the power of relationships. And in that way, if a parent calls up there and knows what class their kid is in, my kid is graduating class of 22, then receptionists and people at the front office will know exactly who to take them to so they can establish. So after a couple of years, those are going to be some powerful relationships between the relationships of the counselor at AP with parents and with students, because they'll know who they need to go to. We have weekly leaver meetings for University and Waco High. That does 2 things. One of them, we check the documentation. So I literally check the documentation TEA expects for a leaver code every single time the registrars are coding a leaver, because they were dropping them, but children left us for identifiable reasons. For example, they moved to Wisconsin. You would code them in a way where they wouldn't be a dropout for us. We know where they went, but we have to have the proper documentation to prove that that's what happened. So in this way, every single week, I'm checking the documentation of the leavers so that we don't just drop a kid. The other thing they do is student services has been pulled in. So Ms. Hamilton and Ms. Nunez, who's working on truancy, those people are in those weekly leaver meetings with the PCLs, because we got to go pound the pavement. This kid stopped coming, what's going on? So before it was pure leavers, no-shows, dropouts, kids we hadn't even made contact with. Now these meetings are starting to fold into high truancy, because if a kid is out for 20 days in a row, they're turning themselves into a dropout. It doesn't matter if we keep them enrolled, they're becoming a dropout. So that's what we've transitioned to this point, is where the committee will be doing that intervention. Let's go find these kids who have the truancy problem and solve the problem. It's really what that committee talks about, is what's in the way to solve the problem. Take a deep breath with the mask. Collaborative data. So what I've also done is start to talk to all of the curriculum directors. So when a kid is labeled a dropout, if they're an English language learner, I'm going to call Ms. Benson and say, you have a dropout, because she has people and resources to go get that child. If they're homeless, I'll call Kathy Wigtill. Kid dropped out, can't find him, we trigger that. Special education, I'll call Charlotte Davis, because we have created these resources that directors have at their disposal. But activating that, someone needs to tell them, let's go, this kid is not here, so we can get the kid what they need to get back. And that might be resources for the parent or some kind of barrier that's come up. Okay, next one. So I think that is one more. More support for the registrars and the documentation. Okay, again, I'm literally looking at all that they do. Reminders for the PEAMS personnel to check the leaver status of students. So sometimes we were coding kids and we were saying, code them, it's a 51, code them this. I heard they went to China Spring. We were coding them. That's just a placeholder. If TEA doesn't find them at that other location, they're our dropout and we didn't even know it because we were telling ourselves a story of where did the kid go. So a reminder to the personnel, they have to check constantly. If parent comes in and says, I'm moving to Dallas, you know it's going to be a few days, they have to go check in a few days. And there are systems TEA has for them to go find the kid in public school or charter school. We've improved the communication system between the alternative schools, JJAP, Challenge, we've built in protocols for when the kid is going back to the campus, the lead counselor on that campus, the cohort team, the at-risk coordinator, all going to get together and build a plan for this child. Because number one, we don't want him going back. It is one of the at-risk indicators. But number two, if they drop him there and they didn't know the kid was supposed to come back, if Waco High didn't know the kid was supposed to come back to them, Waco High doesn't go and look for them. So we wanted to improve that communication. We want them to red flag and say, hey, we sent that kid back to you, but they're still showing you haven't enrolled them. So then the resources at Waco High can kick in again and go find the parent, the student, and get them back in, okay? And I'll talk in a few minutes about Brazos High School, reshaping and rethinking the way we use Brazos High School. And I've been maintaining the list of students. So this is a window that is closed for us. So October 30th, the number of kids that TEA counts as a dropout is done. It's a done number. It was from last September to October 30th. That was a very squirrely number to chase, I promise you. Finding the leavers from last year and this year was no picnic. But the nice part about it is November 2nd, I think it is, was day one. Day one. So it's the Denise Bell tracker. I have like a dashboard. I really need to get a hobby, but this is my hobby, chasing children. And currently we have 12. 7th through 12th grade, we have 12 students that we do not know where they are, but some of them we do. So I'm not going to say those reasons for privacy of those students, but some of them are not a mystery. We can't recover them for where they are or what they're going through. We're not going to be able to recover them, but we keep them on our radar. And every few weeks, we're going to talk about them again to see, now can we help? Now is there something we can do to recapture them? So,
Ms. Bell, I have a question about
Go
that.
ahead.
So we know that we had about 250 kids that didn't enroll.
mhm.
So where are those kids going to show up in these numbers? Or if they were enrolled, they didn't enroll, but and I think, you know, every district in the state now has a lot of children who just did not re-enroll.
Mhm.
They're not, are they going to be dropouts somewhere?
So the 247 is for the school year 18-19. So if you'll go to the next slide, this is where we stand right now. And so this shows you that we've managed to drop the number of students dropping out. So I don't want to present this as a percent because it's a strange denominator we use. But where do we stand for the 19-20 school year? You can see that as a district, we had those 247 drop out in 18-19, but the column right next to it, we only have 170 kids that we can't find. Now, the educator in me is like, that's a lot. That's a lot. And TEA may find them for us. They may be submitted somewhere in another public school that we didn't realize. But you can see for each of the high schools, the number is far decreased, and that's with COVID. We were chasing these kids from the summer this year to up to the October 29th. We were chasing these kids, we were covering these kids, we were knocking on their door. They were like, fine, I'll come back to school, get me a computer, you know. We were being really diligent, reaching out to parents. We had some parents do an outcry for support because there was something going on in the family. I mean, this was powerful stuff. And so the momentum, we were all feeling sort of inspired by going and getting these kids to come back and asking these children. So I've started to ask these children, why did you drop out? Because the more I ask that question, the more data we have from the kids themselves to really know what we have to do. Because if they're getting all the way to 11th and 12th grade and dropping out, to me, that's just a heartbreaker. Because when they get to their late 20s, that's going to be a huge barrier for them. Okay, and so you can see going down, University has only 18, Waco High has 52, Lake Air none, Chavez 2, Tennyson 4, Indian Springs 2, Carver 7, and from Bill Logue, we have none, and then from Wiley DAP, we have 5. But all those numbers are compared with the ones I showed you in the other graph. These are preliminary because TEA may find them, or we may have thought they went somewhere, and TEA's like, no, you thought they went to that district, but you don't. So we'll get a list that's called the underreported kids in about a month or so, and you can bet I'll be spending my time studying that list, bringing it to the leaver meeting, and recovering the kids. So we can't improve the annual dropout rate anymore, but we still recover them for 2 reasons. One, the moral high ground. We want them to get an education. But number 2, graduation rate. Eventually, at the end of that cohort's time, that's when they'll count again as a dropout because they're taking away from that overall. Any questions before I breathe and then do Brazos?
Let me see if I can frame this well enough. I'm looking at this chart and comparing University and Waco High. As you consider indicators, and I'm going to use the phrase predictors maybe, is there anything that you've noted causing the differences in these numbers between University and Waco High from an indicator standpoint?
University still had a little bit of the cohort system. So when I was back at University and Waco High, we had done the cohort system, and University had maintained some of that. And so it creates a bonding experience. It organizes the kids. It establishes relationships. So that would be my theory, but also Waco High has larger numbers. And so we could start to see, even looking at the kids going to other schools, we could start to see what school districts in the area they were leaving us for. So I think it's just a mixture of things, which is why we've put both high schools on exactly the same program. Because the other problem is kids will go from Waco High to University and then hop back from University to Waco High. The only time that's a problem is on the football field. They're all our kids. So getting the 2 high schools to say, this is what it's going to be. We're going to coordinate. The counselors talk to each other. So when the kid transfers over now, one counselor's calling the other, hey, he's your kid. Here's the best number. Here's what I was doing with him to graduate him. Here's the plan he needs, all of that.
We say thank you for adding clarity through your presentation tonight, because certainly the work that you're doing is just extremely valuable for a lot of the kids that we're trying to address and move through to graduation. Like you're saying, once they get into their either later teens or early 20s, the impact is tremendous. So
Yes.
thank you for adding clarity to the situation for the district. I appreciate it.
Any other questions before we talk about Brazos? Okay, so I think we'll need to switch. Okay. So Brazos High School is designed to be a dropout recovery program for us. So we took a good look at what they were doing, took a good look at the kids who went over there. In fact, you'll see some data in there. We interview these children, which is something I plan on doing pretty regularly as part of the intake over there. Because if the traditional high school didn't work for you, then what is it about this that's working for you? So that we can kind of maybe put some of those elements even back in the 2 high schools. So if you'll go to the first. The data I used for this one is the TAPER reports. I looked at attendance, their STAR scores, their staffing. I went through their accountability ratings and labels over the past 5 to 6 years. Looked at their staffing for last year, their enrollment data, how many kids are there. Edmentum is their curriculum, so I'll touch on that a little bit, but I went and pulled some data from their progress in that curriculum. And then student interviews, which we were grateful to Ms. Wigtill in the homeless area, and she had some social worker interns, and they did empathy interviews so that the kids didn't feel like, the principal's asking me questions, I better say the right thing, And Ms. Latchison was open with them. She said, here are these kids. So again, this is something we plan on doing, is doing these empathy interviews And one of the questions we did ask the kids is, what can Waco ISD have done better for you? And so they gave us some powerful answers, and they were happy to do that. And so I think that's a fantastic voice that I'll share with you today. So just a little background. We established Brazos in 2011. We used to have a STARS high school, which was a program that was also what's called an AEC, an Alternative Education Campus. We are defined by TEA as that, and the criteria that we have to meet means that it's giving us a different accountability rating. By getting permission to be an AEC, the curving or scaling of the data is different for them than a traditional high school. So in order to be an AEC, they have to have their own number, their own budget, an administrator, a calendar that follows the same rules, and the availability of services for students who have needs. 75% or more of the students have to be labeled at risk for dropping out. Currently, Brazos is at 98% of the students at risk for dropping out. 50% of the kids must be 6 to 12. Ours are all 9 through 12. And they are required to have traditional and non-traditional methods of instructional delivery. This is an expectation of them, because what's happening at an AEC is the kid was not successful at a traditional high school. This needs to be very different, and so that's what TEA expects. This allows Brazos High School to have different targets and different labels in the A through F accountability system for the state. But the trick is they are rated almost exactly the same for federal accountability. And so that is why Brazos will talk about their comprehensive label is coming from that federal rating. So next. Here's the enrollment, the number of kids that they've had each year, going from the first year they were established all the way until now. So we have a range of 137 to 234 students. I think I'll show you some data that will kind of help you understand why it's so, isn't a predictable pattern. Their range in the last 3 years is 162 to 223, so it's starting to drop. But that's okay, because we talk about number of seats, and in a way, COVID actually gives Brazos a little bit of an advantage because its curriculum is 100% online. So it was already kind of set up for that remote learning, which means we might be able to free up space for students to go there. Next. The ratings, remember, they are an AEC, so they get a different rating. So 2013, they met the alternative standard. They did that in 14 and 15. 2016, when the bar was raised a little bit, they were improvement required, and then you can see in 2017 they bounced back. So this is the old index system before the A through F. In the A through F system, in 2018, there wasn't letters. There wasn't letter grades the first year of A through F, so it was either you met standard or you did not. They met standard. However, they were labeled comprehensive, which is a federal label, and it's because they have less than 60% graduation rate. So that is an automatic attachment for improvement from the federal government. You have to have a 4-year graduation rate of 67% or better. And we're going to see that they're very far from that. In 2019, they were rated as an F, and they continue to be comprehensive. And in 2020, due to COVID, they were not rated, but we continue to work on their numbers to improve them for the rating this year. Okay, so next. So one of the things they have to do for the kids is get them to pass the end of course exams. So I showed you that even though these numbers are lower than what we'd see at the high schools, they're on the upswing. So some things about Brazos' remediation are working because they give them remediation during the day and they're getting there. For University and Waco High, the English 1 and 2 tests are the most failed tests. In the state of Texas, the English 1 and 2 tests are the most failed tests. So their trend follows that, but this is their reading and math. So this is actually an increase in performance. If we go to the next slide, you'll see there's the science and social studies, the EOCs they have to pass, again, on the upswing. Compared to the high schools, their passing percentage is lower, but kids come to them retesters already. The kids come to them, except for U.S. history, which is taken a bit later, these kids come to them, some of them have already taken their English test 7 times. They're really at a place of frustration. So the fact that Brazos is able to increase the passers is impressive given student morale on that. If you took a test 7 times in 2 years and failed it, you would be like, seriously, with this test again? I'll just draw Mickey Mouse's face with bubbles. I give up. So the fact that they're getting gains means they're doing something right. Also, I included the star performance here because of the graduation committees. So students can graduate by a graduation committee. If they fail 2 out of the 5 tests, they can still do a project or portfolio. So this past COVID, we had 18 graduation committees, which means the students finished all the credits and passed 3 out of 5 of their exams. And so they were able to graduate. Next slide. So this is their historic dropout rate. And yes, it is in the 30s. So you can see, as we saw the numbers in the first presentation, the largest numbers of them come from there, but I gave you going down. If you look at that grades 9 to 12, in 14-15, they had a 31% dropout rate. 15-16 of 35, I'm sorry. 16-17, 33, 31, 36. It is our goal to get that number below 30. In a COVID world, I'd be super happy with that. Because we're going to see the makeup of the children in Brazos are not necessarily children. Some of these kids were the class of 2016. So she's serving an older clientele at the same time. She's bringing in some juniors and seniors. Next slide. So here's that graduation rate problem again. The state says, hey, Brazos, everybody who graduates and everybody you re-enroll as a continuer, meaning they're still working on their diploma, we're going to count them like a graduate. So she gets continuers and graduates and GEDs. The kid went somewhere else and took the GED, TA reports back to her. If that was at University of Waco High, that student would be a dropout, but she's an alternative setting, so that's what we do there. Now, federal is all the kids who graduated and that's it. So there is a drastic difference in the numbers that they have because their feeling is the kids have to be enrolled. The state takes we'll give you credit for keeping them and still educating them. The federal rating is like, nope, this is what it's supposed to be. So if we go to the next slide, our trend is the reverse than what it should be. You can see what happened to the class of 2015 over time. So 63% of them graduated and were continuers, right? So the next year, what happened? Her rate went from 63 to 52. The reason that it went down that way is because the continuers didn't come back. When they stopped coming back and continuing their education, then they calculate as a dropout. So that explains the drop that we're having over the years when, interestingly, it should be reverse. More of those continuers should be graduating to take that number up, but it's coming down. So that's also something that we've been working on as well. So the state accountability uses the best of the 4th, 5th, or 6th year, which means you're monitoring 3 cohorts of children over time. It does the same for University and Waco High, but University and Waco High, that 4-year is a pretty strong number to start with compared to Brazos. All right, so some factors contributing to the high dropout rate and the low graduation rate was there was no consistent criteria for Brazos across the last 5 years. So it really depends on who you ask and who's been here at Waco High University and what role they've been in. There's not been a very clear, these are the children who go to Brazos first, prioritizing space for them, and then who can go later. So one thing you're going to see that we did was establish some criteria. Another one, students were ready to graduate, were enrolled back. So what was happening is the kids were like, I want to graduate with my friends back at University of Waco High. In ceremony, that's phenomenal. That's wonderful. I don't care what stage they cross the stage, right? But clerically, you can see what's happening. They're finishing at Brazos, and then they're enrolled at Waco High, and Waco High gets the state credit for the graduate in university. So not only does she have these students dropping out, the graduates are being moved to other buildings. So there's that consequence that's happening there. So we've made some arrangements with the kids. The kids really just wanted to have that moment with their class, which we understand, but at the same time, we need them to sort of honor what happened at Brazos, and we need to give Brazos credit for what it accomplished with that student to the state level. So Brazos's graduation rate to me is not a real one. Because if you were giving back to the high schools, then what was really the graduation rate? And I have time for data. I don't have time for, that's a lot of data. Students were enrolling but not attending. They'd enroll, they'd come one day, and then they'd never come back. Students who were 3 to 7 years past graduation were enrolling for a day and not coming back. So she was holding seats and personnel for that. Messaging from the high schools on how the program worked. So it was sort of like, you can go there for a half day. You can be done in 5 minutes. The messaging of what really happens at Brazos sort of undercut Brazos's administration to be able to say to the kid, how about you strive for an endorsement? Because the kids were being sold a basic diploma, foundation only. And so it was very hard for them to re-message that. So we've changed the conversation. Ms. Latchison goes to the cohort meetings. And when they're going to recommend someone to go there, she gets a chance to talk to the student. The academic struggles for these students are huge. The gaps in their knowledge, a lot of them are retained, highly mobile. So all of those things contributed to their academic performance. That makes it a struggle at Brazos just as much as it did back at the traditional high schools, and there's no transportation available to that campus. So the kids were kind of hitching a ride on different buses to try to get over there. Staffing for 2019, I'm not going to go into the details in this because you can see it's clear how they were staffed. I will say on the 2019, the middle school teachers are no longer there because that program that had students accelerating at middle school isn't there anymore, but it's approximately the same. Next slide. So who are the kids sitting in Brazos right now? As of October 30th, these are the students sitting over in Brazos. Yes, she has 3 students from the class of 2015, 2 from 2016, 4 from 2017, 7 from 2018. So you can see the age range in the description. She has 167 kids, but they range from 16 years old to 24. 96.9% of them are at risk, 98% are ECODIS, 8% are special education. I find this interesting, 6% are GT. The average reading level they have right now is a 6.5 because we've done reading screeners there for the first time this year. And when you look at grade levels, this is the reason I put grade levels side by side with the cohort, because grade level in high school is a product of how many credits you've earned. If you haven't earned enough credits, you don't go to the next grade level. It's not years. So you can see 30 ninth graders doesn't mean pure freshmen. No pure freshmen, no class of 2024 is over at Brazos right now. These are students who are so far behind in their credits that they're still a ninth grader, which you can imagine what that looked like for them back at the traditional high school. So she's got 30, 40, 37, and 55. So she's got a strong trend of the kids getting to 11 and 12. So this is the point where she knows now, and we've talked about this, being very careful of let's get them across the stage. Let's get them what they need. The non-attendance, of course, this is a kind of a granted that it affects their potential funding. So if their ADA, which is the basic $6,160 by 176 days, okay, so it's $35 per day per kid. But if you look at that attendance rate, at that bottom line, 55 kids out constantly is costing her $1,890 a day because they're not showing up, but we're holding the space. So we have to have this conversation about the push-pull of, they came for 2 days and we haven't seen them in 6 months. At some point, we have to kind of let go because there's a kid sitting over at the high school who's behind in credits who could benefit from the program. The next slide does show their attendance rate. So there's the district line at the top with a consistent 94, but Brazos's is up and down for their daily attendance rate. And next slide, what does instruction look like for them? The high school courses are online. Those online courses were vetted to match Texas standards. So they're based on national norms, but they were vetted by our curriculum department to make sure that they just match the TEKS. That's the parts of the program the kid does. The teachers will assign them coursework gradually. They don't just open up the course and say, go for it, because if you looked at them, they're pretty heavy. They do it by modules and lessons, and they support them when they're stuck. There's small group instruction. For the EOC, sorry, I keep losing my breath talking in a mask, but there's small group instruction, at least 1 hour a day per content. So the students did not attend more than 2 of these. If I needed all 5 as a kid, I was only attending 2 because it's a half-day program. So how can I finish my online curriculum if I'm getting one-on-one remediation? So that led to some changes as well. Next slide, Edmentum. I pulled the data on the most common courses needing recovery: English 1, English 2, geometry. Most common ones, even at the high schools, in Edmentum there. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we might need to do some curricular adjustments for the Tier 1 back at the high schools, that something's not quite the way it needs to be, but this has been data that's panned out for years. And what's taking the longest for the kids to finish is actually all the math courses. Algebra 1, 59 hours. I mean, how many days is that? If the kid's going 4 hours a day, you can imagine how long it's taking some of these kids to grind through the content, and that doesn't feel like I'm getting anywhere. I'm not finishing credits. So for overall, Algebra and Algebra 2, 59 and 62 hours on average for these students to finish it. Okay, next. So when they interviewed the kids, there was lots of feedback, and it was interesting to read, because these are young adults. They're 20, they're 17 or 18 and older. So these are young adults' voice in these interviews. And so what did they tell us? They enjoy the one-on-one care they get from their teachers. They felt more supported at Brazos because the other campuses they felt were giving up on them or just pushing them through, which, when we look at it, those are very large campuses. And some kids need a more intimate connection with administration. And some kids are like, hey, there's 2,000 kids in the building. That's just fine by me. So it just depends on a student's needs. Students appreciated the flexibility of scheduling. It was designed to give them an opportunity to work, but what we found was not many of them were working. But then behind in credits, close to dropping out of high school, trying to find a job, you can see all these things pushing in on these students. Next. The students didn't know the number of credits or EOCs they needed to graduate, so they didn't even have this end game in mind. Their reason for enrollment in Brazos: I was truant all the time, I wasn't making attendance, my mom was being taken to court, they were falling behind in credits. The half-day option they found to be helpful. So several did mention also the daycare services that are there available for their kids. That made it a little bit easier. Parental involvement, of course, is a challenge because most of these kids are 18 or older. So their parents, you have some parents who will call and still be plugged in, but you have some parents who are like, he's 18, I don't know what I can do any longer. So all of these concerns and all of this data led to the systemic changes at the 2 high schools and at Brazos. So the first is the description of the cohort system I explained before. The AP and counselor are going to follow those kids for 4 years. The benefit for Brazos High School, there's a clear transition plan. We know who their AP was, who handled their discipline or their ARDS, and we know who their counselor is, who had them on credits. Those 2 people can inform Ms. Lagerson, this is where they were, this is what they need, smooth transition to get the kids started. Benefit for the district, more students will have an established trusting relationship with APs and counselors. I mean, APs don't need to just know the kids who don't behave well. They need to get to know the kids who do great things and are involved in great things. Benefit for the student and parent, a stronger home connection because they know that's the AP, that's the AP for my kid. Can you imagine what that's like 2 years from now for those parents who have built trust and rapport with that AP and that counselor? Tracking the students who enroll but are not attending. At some point, we have to say, we can't just we'll unenroll them. They come back, we'll make a plan, but we have to let it go. Students must attend for a full day now, unless they get 15 credits, and at 15 credits, they're allowed to transition to a half day. Because we just saw how many hours these courses are taking the kids. Half a day was not getting them the gains that they really wanted. 22 is what they need for even a basic diploma. So at 15, there's a conversation about, okay, is it time for you want to go to full day, half day, you have a job, let's kind of see where it's going. After the students have earned 15 credits, when they go to half day, as of today, this also tells you how far behind they are, 55% is now full day. This is the first year these students have been full day. They've been half day before. They were either in an AM shift or a PM shift. Now, that many students have pushed into a full day but you can see the gains that are happening in credits. So this shows the need because you need at least 12 credits to be an 11th grader. So it shows you how far behind a lot of these kids are. Next. At Brazos High School, focused effort on the continuers. Why? I just showed you. Continuers equals graduates. The state is honoring the work that they're doing. A clear process for recommending kids to Brazos High School. Not just they're a discipline problem, they're an attendance problem, like there's a clear transition plan. Students were in what was called the Lake Waco program, which was a program for overaged middle school students. Those students would transition back to the traditional high school. They can go to Brazos again if they choose, but there wasn't a lot of students. We can't solve the overage problem that we may very well have until we tackle that pre-K through 12. So in this case, those students would transition, but their cohort counselors were given information about them, transcripts about them. They were carefully transferred back. For overage students, before we go to that next one, for Lake Waco, overage students is something I definitely want to study for Waco ISD because I feel like it's a problem, but I'm that kind of girl that I need the numbers to tell me what the real problem is, but 11% of our dropouts are overage. The state average is 5%. So you can see that, again, we're trending above the state, but how overage is really my question because my son is one of those late fall babies, so technically someone might consider him overage. I think we got to find how many years are we talking about here to really tackle systems that can improve that problem. Next is individual goal meetings for the students. So when they come in, they say, I'm going to do this by this date, this many credits, I'm going to do this many EOCs. They kind of have a very clear plan. And they meet with their counselor or the principal or the AP. Remediation for the EOCs is now focused on the standards they missed. So that's going to hone it in. And I added a note for myself that the AP at Brazos was a successful English teacher at Waco High. So she really has a handle on the instruction and what is needed. And so her guiding that EOC remediation is really going to be helpful. Remember, I made a note for myself because this is hard to think about. Some of these kids will take the EOCs 10 times one test. So it's very hard to keep them motivated and moving forward, but that's what they're doing for that. Our current projections, given all the changes, the number 81 is not a correct one, but you can see as of right now, the class of 2020 that graduated last year, the numbers look like for 4-year is 57%, but the 4-year federal is 18. What's the big difference? The continuers. The state gives us credit for continuers. That just shows you how big the difference is and how powerful that continuing education is. You can see the differences in the class of 19, 18, and 17, and I'm still working on some of those to be sure I get the right number. But that 81 there should be 32. So you can see again, what was that pattern we saw before? The classes, the longer the cohort goes on, the lower percent of graduation rate because the continuers are not staying. And finally, future plans, connecting the students with the workforce. So these are 18 plus students. Let's teach them how to interview. Let's get some resumes going. You know, all these ideas are out there. Of course, COVID hit Brazos, so it's real hard to go look at other programs, but connecting them up with employment and helping them to get a job, that's what these students need. It's very different from what traditional high school kids might need. Continuing the empathy interviews when the kids graduate. And I do empathy interviews. I don't know if they realize it, but I take in anybody who applies for a tax IGC graduation, where they can graduate via committee with the board's criteria. Well, those people were supposed to graduate in the 90s and early 2000s. It's kind of fun to talk to them, but I stop and I ask them what happened, because they're figuring out they need it and they're coming back. So that's kind of my chance to ask them what we could have done better. Study the data for the overage students is something I intend to do, and then visit other AECs. There are many successful ones that do great things in the state of Texas, so we want to enhance Brazos's effectiveness. Any questions? That was a lot, I know.
I have a question, Madam President. Yes, sir. You hear me?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay. Ma'am, when you gave the a percentage of the reading level at 6.5. Is that saying that they're reading on a 6th grade level, or is there some other level that represent?
No, sir, that's a 6th grade level. That's mid-year 6th grade, and that's the average. Of course, there are kids who are above and below it, but that is the average reading level.
Well, then, wouldn't that be a glaring fact that that also in a lot of this that you discussed, I didn't see anything that really approached the uprating of the reading level of the students.
So in this case, as a preventative measure, there's an awful lot of literacy training the state has done. There's an awful lot of curriculum changes and adjustments we've made to that initial teaching. But in the remediation, again, Ms. Castillo, the AP, is an English teacher, so she works on their reading with them to get that reading level up.
Yeah, and I would add that we are working on reading all the way from pre-K up, beginning with the literacy initiative that we started, that you all approved earlier, a few months ago, that we began this year. So we might provide the board with an update on that at a future meeting.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Madam President?
Porterweg.
Ms. Bell, thank you so much for all of this information. It's really informative and helpful and to bring some clarity. My question for you is, are you at all connected with kind of the city of Prosper Winco's workforce kind of development? I just didn't know if you had been introduced into that circle or you were kind of aware of it, because I noticed future plans wanting to connect kids in the workforce. So
I think I'm blessed to be surrounded by a lot of pretty fantastic directors. So when I share statistics with them or when I share things, those kinds of connections are in our student services department. They're over on this place. So sharing these numbers with people inside the administration lets those people begin to have those conversations. For example, what is the community offering and things like that. So my look is internal. This program evaluation is just what are we doing? But I think we can all see that there are things outside of it, but that is why I share the data with other departments, because they have so many things they can do for these kids. They just have to know who the kids are and what they need.
We did ask Denise Bell to take this on when she began with us this summer, just to really dig into dropout data and also take a deep dive into Brazos High School to see what we could do there. So I want to thank her for her tedious work to do that. Also want to mention, and you may want to talk to the state's reports that are coming out. We will be required to write a dropout prevention plan again this year.
Yes, so in a longitudinal point of view, when you add up all the dropouts over time, we have a very large dropout rate over 4 years as well as within each year. So this year, again, we'll have to write a dropout preventative plan for the state, but we wrote one last year, so I'm looking through that one because we took some steps in it, and they've obviously been successful, that those numbers from that first presentation are down. And so now we can re-examine. We've made some moves that changed it. What are the next moves to make? But we will have to submit that to TEA and do a needs assessment for what the students have and what opportunities are available.
This is an incredible amount of work. Thank you so much for continuing to ask why and why and why. Design thinking, figuring out why do we continue to see unacceptable numbers. And then at some point, you just evaluate, well, and do we just need a program change altogether? But you can't get there until you figure out what we have and where the breakdown is occurring. So thank you, because it's a serious problem, and I think with Brazos, it's just been the numbers, I think for me on the board, just a sense of futility. And I think that your presentation tonight gives me hope that we're going to figure out a way to crack it and make some solid improvements. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is no longer necessary. No action will be taken. And so we're at announcements. Mr. DeBeer.
Thank you, Madam President. As I mentioned earlier this evening, we'll be offering tests tomorrow for our University High School and Waco High School staff and students. At University High School, any students who are in person, any staff members who want to take advantage of that opportunity for free COVID-19 testing can do so by going to the student parking lot between 8 and 11 a.m. tomorrow. At Waco High School, that testing will be happening in the drive behind the gymnasium, entering from Colcord from 1 to 4 tomorrow afternoon, and want to encourage all of our in-person high school students, all of our high school staff to try and take advantage of that if you can. It's definitely another tool that we have to prevent and mitigate the spread of the virus on our campuses. One other thing I wanted to note this evening is exciting news that happened a little bit earlier this week. Maximus Austin, who's an athlete at University High School, qualified for the state cross-country meet. That'll take place on November 23rd in Round Rock between now and your next meeting. And we're really looking forward to giving you the opportunity to meet Maximus during an upcoming meeting, probably virtually still, but meet him nonetheless to celebrate his success. And we're looking forward to rooting him on as he runs in Round Rock later this month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.